When Washington and the new Congress took office in 1789, they faced the challenge of setting the new nation on a new course. From the start, they divided over which direction the nation should be taking. Alexander Hamilton thought that the new nation was destined to grow rich and powerful through developing industry and a strong national government. He called the United States a Hercules in the cradle. But if the nation failed to pay off the enormous debt left over from the Revolutionary War, the new country would soon die. President Washington appointed Hamilton Secretary of Treasury and made him his top advisor on all economic and fiscal policies. Hamilton designed a program to pay off Americans' war debts by having the federal government take over the states' debts and pay them in full. This hurt Southern states that had already paid off much of their debt. The Southern states finally agreed to Hamilton's plan. In exchange, they got the capital moved from Philadelphia to the new District of Columbia, an area carved out of a barren, swampy wasteland on the Maryland-Virginia border. They would call the new capital Washington, D.C. But how did Hamilton plan to pay off the debt? Part of the answer was what so many Americans feared: more taxes. The whiskey tax was the last straw for some of the farmers of western Pennsylvania. As far as they could see, this new tax made the rich men richer while taxing the farmers into poverty. Rallying under the banner of liberty, they threatened tax collectors, terrorized their neighbors who paid the tax, then marched on Pittsburgh and threatened to burn the city to the ground. The Whiskey Rebellion was the first challenge to the new government's rule.
And it became the first occasion for the provision in the Constitution that the federal government would have the power to march a federal army into a state to put down a state insurrection. And this is what happened. There was Alexander Hamilton and George Washington leading a federal army into western Pennsylvania to put down those whiskey rebels. Rather large army, larger than any that Washington actually had under his command during the American Revolution. And by the time they got there, the whiskey rebels disappeared into the woods. They dispersed, they faded away, they were hard to find. A few were arrested and tried and jailed. The dispute was over.
An insurrection was announced and proclaimed and armed against what could never be found.
Thomas Jefferson scoffed at the government's excessive use of strength. Jefferson and others were growing increasingly alarmed about developments in the federal government. And in the 1790s, war in Europe was cutting through American politics like a knife, splitting Americans into two angry factions: Federalists and Democratic Republicans.